Hi, everybody. My name is Phil Lanier. I'm president of Coaching Ourselves, and I'm going to be your host for today's webinar on developing talent with peer learning groups. We are Coaching Ourselves. Coaching Ourselves is a business based out of Montreal, Canada, where I am today. And Coaching Ourselves is a business, we develop peer learning discussion guides for learning and development professionals to use with peer learning groups in their organization to develop talent and transform their organization. Today, we're going to be talking about, I'll be sharing with you our experiences by first comparing some of the different approaches that are available for learning and development professionals today, so you can understand how peer learning in groups compares to the other approaches. I'll explain to you dialogic learning, which is the core pedagogical process that drives peer learning in groups. I'll tell you about peer learning with expert content and how our Coaching Ourselves discussion guides help drive peer learning in groups to success. Finally, some of the best practices that we've discovered over the past 15 years, working with hundreds of organizations and peer learning groups, and then next steps for all of you to continue discovering peer learning in groups and how you can use it to develop talent in your organization. When you look at the different approaches that learning and development professionals have these days, obviously one of the approaches that we're all familiar with is the e-learning or the instructor-led training, which is pedagogy and content primarily, and it's focused usually on individual learners so that they can learn some new knowledge, and as a result of having this new knowledge, they're going to have these new skills and competencies that we need them to have to perform or increase performance in our organizations. Learning professionals also these days, we see more and more the application of mentoring or coaching in leadership or learning programs. Mentoring and coaching is, of course, a pure process. There's no content typically in mentoring and coaching interventions. It's always a pair, so a coach and a coachee, or a peer coaching, or mentor and mentee. And we see a behavior change come out of the coaching and even the mentoring process. We see more and more group-based processes being applied in learning and development programs and interventions. And of course, we have action learning, group coaching, team coaching, and things like lean-in circles or working out loud in small circles and so on and so forth. These are all process-based activities, and they always work on a group of learners, usually of 4 to 6. And we see, as a result of these processes, we see behavior change in the participants. And very importantly, you see the relationships improve, which leads to trust for the participants. Finally, we have Coaching Ourselves, and Coaching Ourselves produces peer learning discussion guides so that you can combine your peer learning groups with the Coaching Ourselves expert content. And now you have both the process of the group activity plus the pedagogy and content that we've captured in our expert content for your participants. The result, of course, of combining these two is you get the new knowledge as well as the behavior change from the intervention. And you see the increase in trust as a result of the better relationships, greatly increase performance as a result of peer learning groups with expert content. When you look at what's happening inside of these different formats, Cartesian learning is the process that we're all familiar with, having gone through elementary schools and high schools in our various cultures and societies. And Cartesian learning is the idea that knowledge is like a substance that rests in the head of the trainer, and pedagogy is a transfer of that substance from the trainer into the head of the learner. It's an individual cognitive activity. And Cartesian learning is very good depending on what you're trying to educate your participants around. So maths and scientists and anything that involves content is very good. But of course, if you're looking to develop new skills and new behaviors, just because somebody knows how to do something, doesn't mean that they're going to be any good at doing this. So Cartesian learning is what we typically see in instructor-led training or e-learning as the approach. Social learning, which is increasingly popular in these days when we're isolated and we're looking to bring people together, is the idea that humans learn from each other. We do this all the time in the workplace, in our daily lives, as we observe one another, and we try to imitate the various behaviors that we see other humans doing. And in peer learning groups, we share stories about what's been going on, and through discussion, we make sense of these stories as we learn from one another's experiences to make sense for ourselves. And in peer learning groups, social learning is a key component of how people are learning together in a peer learning group. And then finally, we have dialogic learning, which is the idea that we learn through discussion. Dialogic is an ancient word, and it's this idea that you're learning through a discourse or a dialogue. And it's been around for thousands of years. The ancient Greeks, of course, were doing Socratic dialogues and other dialogue-based techniques. When we're in organizations and we're, let's say, in a brainstorming meeting or some sort of group meeting, we are learning and acting freely as we go about trying to solve the problems together. And this is when dialogic learning, learning through discussion, works best. Finally, for a good dialogic learning to be highly effective, you're looking for groups that have minimal power relationships. So you try to keep people from the same level of hierarchy in an organization to get the most out of this approach to learning. And this is what we see happening in peer learning in groups. This is me in 2003, there on the left, when I still had lots of hair on my head, 20 years ago, even more than that right now. And I was a director of software engineering for an American-based firm developing speech recognition software. And I was running a management team at the time. This is the tail end of the dot-com crash. We had gone through multiple rounds of layoffs that many high-tech firms had done in the past. And we were having a really hard time getting ourselves back up and motivated and engaged and working through all the projects we had to do. So I started looking for some sort of a solution for myself and my management team as the director of operations for this team. I thought I could go to an executive MBA program, which was fairly popular in the 2000s, as a way to learn the new skills and competencies, but it was very expensive, these programs. And frankly, I didn't think that going away to a program for 2 years was going to solve my immediate problems, which was dealing with the layoffs and the crises that we were facing. I had a good relationship with Professor Henry Mintzberg. Henry Mintzberg is a well-known management and business school academic out of McGill University, also here in Montreal. And Henry had been working on how managers learn in organizations in a Masters of Management program that he had created. And so working with Henry, we said, look, this idea of learning through reflection and discussion can work just well inside of our organization. And that was his key approach to helping managers and leaders learn. And so with the help of Henry Mintzberg and other professors and management thinkers, we created this content, these discussion guides, as you see us today. And these content drove our small learning meetings as a management team. This turned out to be one of the most powerful tools that I had as a leader to help get my team together, to help them learning and going and solving the problems much more economically, efficiently than we had in the past. And so we started doing this activity. Now, at first, you can imagine some of my engineering managers had some doubts on the value of reflection. And this is, of course, what you see from many, especially engineering types. There's this idea that action is what it's all about in the organization. But of course, as a manager, as a participant in organized life, you need to stop and reflect on what you've been doing to make sense of it so you can learn and grow wise. Because if you're always doing action, then it doesn't make so much sense eventually. So this process worked very well for myself as an engineering director. And I said, this is what I'm going to bring through to other organizations, the content that we develop to drive these learning meetings and the process of learning in a group through discussion and sharing stories with one another. Turns out that was a very good idea. And with Henry Mintzberg, here's a picture of our co-founder, Henry Mintzberg. He'll tell us that leadership, like swimming, cannot be learned by reading about it. And what he's telling us is that, let's say all of you didn't know how to swim, and I gave you a perfect lecture seminar on how to swim, 3 hours. I told you all the latest tips and tricks on how to swim. And there was 100% transfer of learning. So you remembered everything that I told you about how to swim. And then I put you all into a large swimming pool, you'd all drown. but you'd have lots of knowledge about what you're supposed to do, but you'd be unable to do it because swimming, like management or riding a bike, for example, it's a practice. It's something that you learn by on the ground, working in your organization. And then that all important step to take a step back and reflect on your experiences working together so that you can improve and learn from your own experiences. And that's what Henry is saying in this quote. And that's what we were doing in our management learning meetings, or our social learning meetings, as we call them at the time. Coaching Ourselves has been around for 15 years, and Harvard Business Review about a year and a half ago did a study on what's the state of peer learning in groups or peer learning forums in our industry today. And Coaching Ourselves, of course, we were interviewed and we shared lots of information on our experiences. And Harvard Business Review, through their research, said that the key factors for success for peer learning groups is: one, you keep your group small; two, you want to have regular reflective conversations. It's not a one-off, it's an ongoing process. And then most importantly, the conversational structure must be carefully defined to ensure depth, encourage multiple perspectives, and provoke insight. And this is what we provide at Coaching Ourselves with the peer learning discussion guides. These discussion guides will ensure that the conversation among the peer groups have that structure for depth, multiple perspectives, so that participants make sense of those experiences and move forward with their thinking to change their behavior and increase operational effectiveness. We've worked with a large number of different management, business school, and organizational thinkers. We have over 70 world-renowned authors, and we've co-created with them the peer learning discussion guides that drive peer learning in groups to success. Our expert content is aligned to your organizational goals. We have over 100 of these discussion guides with key skills and organizational goals, such as leading with humility, or dealing with delegation, or accountability. It's a tricky world. And these discussion guides are good for 60-minute or 90-minute peer learning sessions. We create new guides on an ongoing basis, following the latest trends and what organizations are looking for and need, about 5 to 6 new guides every year. They're available in 12 languages, and we can co-brand these with your learning and development team and customize them just for your organization and your specific needs. With this big box of peer learning discussion guides, it's a toolkit for the learning and development professional to then use to develop the talent in the organization through peer learning groups. It makes it very easy for you to take what you need very quickly without having to create content or work through content. And we've been doing this for 15 years, and our content is battle tested with thousands and thousands of participants. We have about 25,000 participants every year that use our peer learning discussion guides. What you get from this expert content is flexibility. It makes it very easy for you, when you're looking to develop talent with the peer learning groups, to design and run a program. The type of programs peer learning groups show up in is, we see formal programs, which is the idea of getting a cohort of participants together for, let's say, 1 session per month over 5 months. And we also see a lot of informal and emergent programs, as learning and development professionals are creating an iterative type approach to their leadership programming. And in this case, we typically see things like you train up HR business partners to run peer learning and group sessions with their clients across your organization. And then as they go about running little programs and little interventions, the L&D team will coalesce the various initiatives around the organization into a broader program. And that's how the emergent programs are created. We also see peer learning in groups used as an add-on to more complex programming. And of course, in some cases, you'll start off by using peer learning in groups for one-off type sessions, such as a leadership forum, or maybe, let's say, the IT manager is looking for you to run a collaborative workshop for them during his or her offsite. And so peer learning in groups with one of our peer learning discussion guides is an easy way to solve that problem. We at Coaching Ourselves provide a train the trainer program for leadership development professionals that will prepare you to design and run programs and solutions using peer learning in groups. And we'll share with you a lot of our expertise on how to design and run these programs and go about using this in your organization. I'll give you a client example of peer learning in groups. This is a public sector organization. They're now entering their 5th year of using peer group learning as one of their key approaches to leadership development and organizational improvement. Their goals when they started doing peer learning in groups was to provide a place for continuous learning for their participants. They had offered a lot of these one-off programs, and now they were looking to keep people together on an ongoing basis, and they wanted to build those connections and that community in their large population. They have a population of 800 learners. About 600 of those are individual contributors. So these are emergent leaders. They don't have people management responsibilities, and about a quarter are supervisors and line managers. And they offered a program that was 2 sets of 5 sessions, so 5 sessions in the spring and 5 sessions in the fall, and it was voluntary participation. And for every set, they would end up getting anywhere from 150 to 300 participants registering, and people would register multiple times because they had such a good experience. The first time, they would do another set of 5 with a new group of colleagues in another program. They ran everything on Microsoft Teams, which was their existing IT platform, so there was no IT challenges, and everybody was already familiar with the technology. And at first, they would help the groups get started. New peer learning groups in organizations typically need some support to get started. But by the 2nd year, the idea of peer learning in groups was socialized among the learner population, and the groups were all self-facilitated. And so it was easier to continue scaling at that point in time as existing participants showed new participants how this process worked and how to be free in these discussions so that you can get the most out of it, as it were. The participants cited meaningful work relationships, a privileged space to think about important issues and day-to-day work challenges. It was an extremely valuable program for the participants. The executives in this organization were thrilled with the results. It is a low-risk program. The cost was not that expensive, and it's voluntary participation, and they have a very high participation rate. So people are doing it because they want to, because it's helping them. And this is great from a senior sponsorship perspective. And you're seeing the results. They see their KPIs improving in this organization as a result of the participation in the peer learning groups. And as you can imagine, people take actions after each one of these peer learning sessions, and those actions build up to improve all sorts of aspects of the organization as a result of the program. I'll share some best practices with you on what we've learned over 15 years of running peer learning in groups with our expert content at Coaching Ourselves. So the grouping strategies, as I mentioned, keep the group small is one of your key lessons that I can share with everybody that's looking to do peer learning groups. 4 to 6 participants is the ideal group size. You want people from the same level in the organization so you can minimize those power relationships, but you can also experiment. We have some clients that do extreme mix. So they will invite people from the C-suite, individuals from the C-suite, to sit with groups of individual contributors or emerging leaders and run through a series of peer learning sessions together. As you can imagine, the outcome is amazing for both the executive, who has the chance to talk with the individual contributors and know what's going on the ground in their organization as a result of the storytelling and listening, and for the individual contributors to, of course, listen to someone from the C-suite and get connected at that level. Really binds people together and makes for powerful outcomes. Keeping the groups intact for a number of sessions also is a very important way to improve peer learning in groups, because the groups develop more and more trust, the relationships get tighter, and so, as you can imagine, the discussions get even more valuable for the participants. You can keep groups together you can keep natural work teams together and form groups out of that. You can design groups such as cherry picking people from across your organization to create a diversity from different business units, or you can randomize groups. In some cases, we see that you're not sure if everybody's going to show up for every session because people are busy and they're running around a bit. And so you randomize your groups based on who shows for each session, and you get great outcomes at that approach as well. The other idea, best practice, is facilitation. So in most cases, in most organizations, you need to help groups get started by providing somebody at the group level that will hold the space, that will facilitate the groups to get started. But they don't have to be there all the time. The groups will learn how to do it on their own, but they do need help to get started. So we see formal facilitation, such as learning and development professionals or HR business partners that have been trained up to hold the space for these. We also see informal facilitation as being fairly popular these days, as the L&D professionals train operational leaders to be facilitators. So there are always a number of operational leaders that are more than happy to get trained up in some new skill, facilitation for groups, and then run and help groups of their colleagues go through this process. Another good way to help the groups get started is by allowing potential participants to observe a session running. So you run a demo, people observe, that's social learning as they observe you doing peer learning in groups. And then just after observing a group going through part of a session, people get the idea and they can get into these sessions themselves. Remembering that we provide the discussion guides with all the content, the questions, and the structure and the timing, so it's easy for any group of operational leaders to have success in a peer learning group. And then finally, socialize the idea in the organization. This is the idea of offering, let's say, free demo sessions, getting senior stakeholders to try a session and then talk about it, and of course, sending out communication and emails and so on and so forth. Coaching Ourselves has a Train the Trainer program that will also prepare you to do all of this facilitation. So we'll train you how to facilitate for peer learning in groups with Coaching Ourselves. We'll show you how you can train operational leaders to facilitate, and along with the design and how to run programs with our Train the Trainer, we will start you off as a learning team to start using peer learning in groups in your programs and interventions to develop talent. And that leads us to the last thought of scaling. Key idea to scale this approach is to leverage your existing IT infrastructure. Microsoft Teams or Zoom work really well for peer learning programs. The participants, of course, already know the technology, so you don't have any technology learning challenges. You don't have any security issues because the technology is already existing in your existing IT infrastructure. And it's very easy to set up programs and run them with your existing IT infrastructure. We also know that you should do some pilots and get the buy-in organizationally from the key stakeholders, because once you have the buy-in, it's obviously much easier to scale as people know why they're doing it, know how it aligns with the organizational strategy, and then they're much more motivated to engage in the process. And then finally, you prepare the groundwork by doing a training of a group of your operational leaders as champions or informal facilitators so that the process can get started. We also see this sort of organic scaling happening in a number of our clients. Many of our clients, they start off and they've been around for 6, 7, 8 years. They do this. And so there's a period at the beginning of the process where they would train HR business partners and arm the HR business partners with this large toolkit of peer learning discussion guides so that they can do these sort of workshops and small interventions at a team level. And then after a period of time, that builds up, especially with the key L&D team seeding other communities such as employee resource groups and such with this approach, and then focusing in on the training of others to run it with it themselves. And that over a fairly maybe 12 to 18 months, you see that start to scale in organizations anywhere from 5,000 to 10,000 employees. It spreads within these different social groups, and then you can scale fairly rapidly after that. So we've had hundreds, thousands of clients, in fact, thousands, tens of thousands who use it every year. And we've got many positive testimonials from our participants and our clients. This director of learning and development is telling us that it's cost effective, it's innovative, and participants love the process and they want to come back to each session because they learn from each other. They have this privileged space to reflect and learn, and you see that in the KPIs. You see the results in your organization once you get people participating. The participants themselves, their bosses will say, in this case, the senior operational leader will tell you how participants will prioritize coaching ourselves over other meetings because they get so much value out of the process. And it's this unique space to be curious, honest, to listen to your colleagues, be listened to, and get new perspectives. So I'd like to thank you all very much for taking the time to listen to me talk about peer learning in groups with expert content. To get more information and really get in depth on a lot of the details that I've just alluded to, join us for a facilitated demo session. You can go to coachingourselves.com/demo and sign up. It's a 1-hour facilitated demo session where you will experience the real power of peer learning in groups. We'll run you through, we'll facilitate our discussion guide on dealing with delegation, one of our most popular themes in organizations these days, and be there to answer all your questions on how this works, what sort of results you're going to see when you start to introduce this, and how you as a learning and development professional can get started using these tools for your clients inside of your organizations. So thank you all very much. Now it's open to questions. I'm just looking at the chat and I will, okay, so I'm seeing a question from Simon. I'm just going to go with the questions I see. So how do we ensure accountability and engagement? Two points there. So how do you ensure accountability? So the idea of accountability is that people will come to these sessions and they'll commit to taking some action to improve the organization because it's coaching. That's why we call it coaching ourselves, right? And then they'll come back in a subsequent session. How do you ensure participants are accountable? Well, the design of the process is it's a peer learning group. So you get a group of 4 to 5 people and they become accountable to each other very quickly. So you get peer accountability. So people will commit to some action. They'll come to the next session. Perhaps the first time they will have forgotten or they've been busy, you know, the real world. But then the peer group is going to bring them back in and then they're going to do a second session and they're going to learn how to make actions that they actually follow through on because they're telling their peers how it goes. So you have that kind of double loop every session. And that really works well for accountability. Engagement is participants are asked to participate in the session voluntarily. They come to the first session. They're in a group of 4 to 5. It's impossible not to be engaged when you're in a Zoom or Microsoft Teams breakout room with 4 or 5 other people and having a conversation because the group is so tight and you are talking about your experiences and what's challenging you and you're working together. It's a highly engaging process and they keep coming back as a result. So we see people, once they come to one session, they want to keep coming back. I have another question. Hopefully that helps, Simon. Walter Slade is asking, what training is provided to peers on effective peer coaching of others? So the training we provide is to help facilitators get started. And then the facilitators run groups of participants through a series of these discussion guides. The facilitators are helping the participants engage in the process so that they can share and learn from each other. And we've trained them to do that, or we've trained you to train them to do that. Once they get started in this process, you see that the participants, after, let's say, 2 sessions, they learn how to engage with their peers so that they can help each other out. And of course, the discussion guides provide all the structure. So you follow the questions and you answer them and you have a discussion and you go through the various exercises and then you're peer coaching each other through the structure that we're providing. Warren is asking how many sessions make up a typical program and what's the frequency? So typical programs are, let's say, 5 sessions over 5 months. So 1 session per month. You can have a cohort of, let's say, 300 participants, and you divide them up into groups of 5, and each group will run through the 5 sessions. You can set it up as 5 workshops with breakout rooms, and people will go into their breakout room during the session, while you as the host can do a little sharing in between table groups, as it were, after each session. Corey's asking, hi, Philip. Using dialogues to help folks find shared understanding is great before considering decisions in the group. What have you and your clients observed about this? Thank you very much. shared understanding. So the main thing is it's not just the dialogue, Corey, it's the relationship. I think that's important here, because the people develop this tight learning relationship in the group where you're open. So you're not fearful of saying something that might be held against you. I mean, first you are, because that's the lived experience you might have in your organization, but the group within the second session is already sort of becoming a special place. And that sort of filter and worries that we have in our organized life drops, and we become a very tight group of people trying to help each other out. So the dialogue with the right relationship allows us to see other people's perspectives, see other perspectives, explore very quickly different ideas, and come to much better decisions as a result. So that would be my answer there. Simon is also asking another question, which is, how do we define and measure the goals and impact of these conversations aside from post-session, how did you like it type questions? So the measurement, there's 3 levels. Certainly we ask participants, not so much how they like it, but we ask participants, was it a good way to spend your time compared to what you could have been doing? So that idea of they spent 90 minutes engaging in a learning activity, they could have spent that last 90 minutes writing emails or dealing with some fire that they have or something like that, but instead they were doing this activity. So we asked them to use their judgment based on time spent, because as you know, in organized life, the one asset that's always the hardest to come by is time. You never have enough time. And so that's the one that we really want to measure. Is this the best way to use your 90 minutes compared to what you could have been doing? However, after that, the next level of assessment is to ask, if you wish, their boss. So there's after groups have ran through a series of sessions, you as a learning professional would have a telephone call with the senior VP of operations and say, hey, you just had 80 people run through 5 sessions. Do you see any difference in your business? That's it. And you have an open conversation. And that is that's what counts. That senior VP of operations will tell you straight out, no, nothing's changed, in which case the program isn't working, or yes, I've seen the changes. People are coming up and they're telling me what they think we should do rather than waiting for me to tell them. They're collaborating. I can see my KPIs improving. This is what we see from large-scale coaching ourselves interventions or peer learning groups. And finally, Chinaza has asked question, do you work with companies with an in-house training and development team? And what is your approach in this team? So Chinaza, yes, absolutely. We work with in-house training and development teams, and we offer a train the trainer. So we do train the trainer for the L&D team. We show them all that we've learned over the years working with other L&D teams. And then we continue to support them as they start to run their initial pilots, and then they design and run programs. And of course, over time, they're training others internally. So they become quite self-sufficient. You get centers of expertise forming of peer learning groups, centers of expertise for peer learning in groups in many organizations once it gets started. And it spreads. As you can imagine from that point in time. And that's always been our objective as a vendor of solutions. We want to help our L&D partners learn and develop and get new skills on how to do what we're doing. And then we're focusing on constantly producing these discussion guides on an ongoing basis, which we have a great amount of expertise in doing. And they turned out very, very well nowadays. So I want to thank you all very, very much for coming to the webinar. If there are any other questions, please feel free to send us an email. And I would really like to see you at our demo session. Please, you can go to the demo session page right now. We offer demo sessions every second Tuesday. So just sign up for whatever demo session you need, makes sense for your schedule. And we'll be together for an hour, myself and a small group of you, 4 or 5 for each demo session. We keep it tight so we can really tell you all the details and walk you through this. And you will learn a lot coming to our demo session. And of course, most importantly, you'll try it. Once you try peer learning in groups, then you'll have a visceral understanding of what this is and be able to see all sorts of ways that you can use this in your work and in your organizations. I'm so happy that you came today. I want to thank you all very much. We will send you the recording, of course. And there's a link to the demo session in the chat. Please feel free to sign up. And I hope to all see you again at one of our demo sessions. Be well, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. I wish you all the best and a great weekend. Bye, everybody.